This is the story of Purgle the Purple Fairy. Story number 1, The Day She Met Hayleigh, by Suzanne Grobler for Grannymouse's Children's Stories on YouTube. One day, Hayleigh was playing with her toy ponies by the fairy bush. She brushed the ponies' manes and tails and made them trot up and down an imaginary show pony arena. The fairy sat quietly among the flowers in the fairy bush, watching their action. They loved watching little children play, and sometimes even played with the toys left behind after the children went inside for the evening. Purgle, the purple fairy, was watching the game with the ponies so closely. She leaned out of her flower to get a better view and fell out, right into the middle of Hayleigh's imaginary show arena. "Ouch!" Purgle cried, rubbing the arm that she fell on. Hayleigh immediately stopped playing and bent down closer to see what strange little bug landed in her game. She saw it was a fairy. She couldn't believe it. She'd never seen a real live fairy before. "Are you okay, little fairy?" Hayleigh asked. Purgle tried to tell Hayleigh that her arm was sore, but because she was so small, she had a tiny voice, and Hayleigh couldn't hear her. Hayleigh told her that she couldn't hear her and told Purgle she should climb into her ear. Purgle flew up and climbed into Hayleigh's ear. "Can you hear me?" Purgle asked. "Having a fairy in your ear is ticklish," so Hayleigh laughed. She could hear Purgle and said, "Hello, fairy. I can hear you now. My name is Hayleigh. Are you hurt?" Purgle said, "Hello, Hayleigh. My name is Purgle. I'm the Purple Fairy. I hurt my arm when I fell out of the flower. It's not broken, but it is sore. I'm going to need some bee pollen medicine from the fairy nurse to make it feel better. Will you take me there?" Hayleigh immediately said, "Of course I will. You just need to tell me where to find her." Purgle told her, "You will need to go to the other side of the garden, past the big tree and the pile of stones. Carry on straight for about 10 steps and stop by the yellow roses growing on the fence. She lives in the 3rd flower." Hayleigh stood up and Purgle almost fell out of her ear. Hayleigh laughed again because it was so ticklish. Purgle found a comfortable spot in the ear where she wouldn't fall out. Hayleigh walked to the other side of the garden. She walked past the big tree, past the pile of stones. She walked 10 more steps and found the yellow roses growing on the fence. And she stopped outside the 3rd flower. Purgle climbed out of Hayleigh's ear and went to the nurse fairy in the 3rd flower to get the medicine. Hayleigh looked at Purgle and the nurse fairy. Purgle had flowing purple hair and a beautiful purple and red flower dress. The fairy nurse had beautiful golden hair and white nurse clothes made out of bird feathers. The fairy nurse rubbed the bee pollen medicine onto Purgle's sore arm. Hayleigh saw Purgle's arm glow gold and then became normal color again. She knew Purgle was healed. Purgle flew up and back into Hayleigh's ear and said, "Thank you, Hayleigh. I feel better now. Can I come play ponies with you?" "Yes, that would be so much fun," Hayleigh said as she walked back towards her ponies. Purgle helped Hayleigh brush the ponies' manes and plait their tails. Then she sprinkled a little bit of fairy dust on them, and they galloped and danced around the imaginary arena, just like real ponies. Hayleigh was so happy. She and Purgle played all afternoon. Granny called Hayleigh in for supper, and she packed up her toys. Purgle didn't want to leave Hayleigh, so she flew up and climbed back into her ear. Hayleigh ran in excitedly and asked Granny if her new friend could stay for supper. Granny looked behind Hayleigh and didn't see anyone. She thought that Hayleigh had an imaginary friend. Granny said, "Yes, your friend can stay for supper." Granny set an extra place on the table for Hayleigh's friend. Hayleigh laughed and said, "Granny, that plate, cup and knives and forks are too big." She gathered them up, took them to the kitchen, and ran to her room to get items from the smallest tea set she had. Hayleigh then put them on the table and dished up a tiny bit of chicken and chip onto the plate for Purgle. She then put one drop of Coke into Purgle's cup. Then they began to eat supper and talk about their day. Hayleigh told Granny about how she met her friend Purgle and that Purgle now lives in her ear. Granny couldn't see fairies and didn't see Purgle sitting at the table enjoying her food. Granny laughed, thinking that Hayleigh made the whole story up. After supper, Hayleigh carried her and Purgle's dishes to the sink, then went to her room to play with the dolls. Purgle was having the best time ever and asked Hayleigh if she could live with her forever. Hayleigh liked having Purgle to play with and said she would ask Granny. Granny came at bedtime and told Hayleigh to go to sleep. Hayleigh asked if Purgle could live with them. Granny said yes. Purgle was so happy and flew back into Hayleigh's ear for bedtime. Granny tucked Hayleigh into bed and said, "Good night, Hayleigh." Hayleigh said, "You forgot to say good night to Purgle." Granny laughed and said, "Good night, Purgle." Granny then closed the bedroom door, and Hayleigh and Purgle fell asleep and had magical dreams. The end. For more stories, follow Granny Mouse's Children's Stories on YouTube.